For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:07 on CJAD. Welcome to today's Entrepreneur program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. And Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Michael Newton, who's in for Josh Miller. Welcome back, Michael.
Hi, Dan. Thanks.
So how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, thank you. Other than the slushy, wet feet that we got walking in, other than that, we're doing pretty well.
It is quite messy out there. And why don't we begin by introducing our guest this evening, David Reich. I guess it's going to be tough to define the work that Mr. Reich has done over the years.
David has quite a storied past. He's a young 83 years old. I've known David for over 20 years. And he's going to give us a little bit of a walk through some of his education, as well as the very large family business that he chose not to get involved in and start his own architectural work. He did some teaching along the way, and he's got a few other stories for us. So the hard part will be trying to keep him within an hour.
Excellent. So should we start at the beginning then?
Might as well. David, welcome.
Thank you.
So tell us about first, are you a native Montrealer?
Born and bred.
And what is your educational background? What did you have your heart set on doing when you were young?
How young?
Let's try teenager. I don't know.
No, I really didn't make up my mind of what I wanted to be until I was about 13 or 14 years old. A fellow sitting next to me asked me, "What are you going to be?" I said, "Well, I've thought of everything and I've discarded them all, so I have to be something." "What are you going to be?" He says, "I'm going to be an architect." And that had never occurred to me. He told me what it did, and it covered all the things that I'd love to do. I love to build, I love to draw. And he says, all you got to do is go and make drawings and watch the buildings go up. I said, that's for me, and I went home and told my father, "Pa, I'm going to be an architect."
And how did that go over, David, given the fact that the large family business, which employed multiple families?
Oh, there were about 13 families in the family business. Anybody who breathed and walked past was sucked right into it. My brothers, my brother, my cousins, my uncles, my aunts, everybody. If you married into it, you got stuck there too. And there was nothing wrong with the business. It was a good business, and they're nice people to work with because I knew them. I was related to them by marriage. And they would have welcomed me into the business. But I told my father, he always knew. I told him I never wanted to be in the business for no good reason. There's no special reason why I didn't. Not that we're nasty or anything. But I said, I want to be an architect. He says, "What does an architect do?" I told him. And he said, "Well, how do you make a living?" I said, "Well, you open an office and you put your name on the door and you sit down, you wait for clients to come and see you." He says, "You wait for clients to come?" I said, "Yes." He says, "That's not a business." But I went into it. And I never regretted it. And that was back around 1942 or 3 or something.
It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Were you ever tempted, as you hit some tough periods maybe along the way, to join the family business? Because the family business
never.
was in existence until, what, early 90s?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, no, never. I never was attracted to anything else. I always loved what I did and didn't want to do anything else.
So you were telling me earlier that when you first started to build, you were designing houses.
Well, we all came out of school designing houses. There wasn't too much else to do. Sometimes we did kitchen alterations, sometimes we did basement renovations, and of course then we had small jobs besides that.
So basically it was clearly some big money to be made back then.
Oh, back then, yeah. We were designing houses, and I was one of the top earners in houses. I was getting $10 to design a house. And in those days, $10 would buy you a few things, but not very much.
You moved on from building houses to building some larger buildings. Maybe give us a bit.
Well, we like all architects, we started out small, and there was a big backlog of unbuilt buildings in Canada at the time. The war had just finished. There was no housing had been built for 6 or 7 years. There was a big need for it. People were coming over. There was a lot of speculation in terms of buying land and building these things, and we were right in the middle of it. Of course, we weren't getting paid very much, but it was very alive. And then we moved up a little bit. We did a small warehouse or two, what would pass as a shopping center, which today would be laughable. 3 or 4 stores leaning against each other on a lot. And until I had a lucky break. And I seized the break, the opportunity, and I got involved in industrial construction. And that proved to be what I spent most of the rest of my life doing.
Who are some of the bigger companies you've designed for?
Well, we worked for and still work for SNC, now SNC Lavalin. We did that. We're still doing their work, and this is 60 years later, or 55 years later. Well, we worked for every big one, Shawinigan and Montreal Engineering, and we worked for almost every... No other architects were interested in industrial buildings. There was no glory. There was no winning contests, no winning competitions. You didn't get written up, but nobody cared what a smelter looked like or a mining operation. We did all those things.
Has most of your design work been in Canada, or have you done any designing outside
we
the country?
We have worked right around the world with that, because a lot of the engineering was done here, and the engineers would need an architect to design something in Malaysia or in South America or anywhere in the world. We worked in many countries. We did the international airport at the time in Abu Dhabi. We did dams in Malaysia. We worked a lot in the Arctic here, by the way. We did the town of Shisasabi, which is now the capital of the Cree Indians. We did work for the Inuit all over the place. We did their schools.
I understand you did some work in Nigeria as well.
Oh, we did work for Nigeria. Oh, that was something. We designed the parliament buildings for the Midwestern state of Nigeria. That was very interesting because Canada had given a $2 billion gift to the government of Nigeria. Of course, there was a few conditions attached to it. The main condition was that the money has to be spent in Canada. So they sent over a representative from Nigeria to come here and to choose whatever projects in Canada they could replicate there. And the fellow showed up, and they took him for a tour in Quebec. They wanted most of the money to be spent in Quebec. And he passed by a chicken plant where 20,000 chickens every morning marched in, and they came out on cardboard platters covered with plastic. And he says, "I'll have one of those." Well, if you've ever seen a Nigerian chicken, he's running for his life without feathers. So if that's what he wanted, that was okay. So we didn't do that. Then they said, they passed by the legislature building in Quebec. And the man says, "What's that?" He says, "That's our parliament building." He says, "I want one of those." They said, "Okay." So they hired me to do it. And I went to the authorities of Nigerian government, and I said, "We're going to do your parliament building. Tell me, what should I put in it?" He says, "Well, we don't have a parliament." I said, "Well, how do I plan it?" He says, "Make it up." So I designed the whole building out of my head, Chamber of Chiefs, Chamber of Commoners, and we made the model, and I went to Nigeria, and we spent several months there. Of course, nothing ever got built because the materials weren't available. They don't quarry stone, they don't have copper, they didn't have metals, they didn't have equipment, they didn't have the skills. And what they built mostly there, this was in Benin, where I spent my time, was mud. That is, you would dig into the ground, you take out the mud from the ground, which was very cohesive, you put it together, and the deeper you went, the higher the building was built. And I said, "Well, this is really great. We'll build a parliament building out of mud." So they said, "It's fine. If you ever want to dissolve Parliament, you just take a hose."
Our guest on today's Entrepreneur this evening is David Reich. We have to take a very quick break, and we'll get back to more stories from Mr. Reich in just a second. It's 7:15.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:18 on today's Entrepreneur. Dan Delmar, along with Michael Newton of Fuller Landau, who's filling in for Josh Miller this week. And our guest this evening is David Reich.
Thanks, Dan. David, we're going to take a little bit of a twist here, go from the architect world to a little bit of world of education. At one point, you decided if you're going to stay in Quebec that you needed to learn to speak French. So, and like everything else you've done, you decided to do it maybe a little bit different from everybody else.
Well, it became apparent after a few years of practice here in Quebec that we were hiding from what was really the reality. So I said, we're going to have to do all our work in French because, first of all, the construction industry was mostly French and Italian and so on, which operated in French. So I said, well, I'm going to learn French. The best way to learn it is to teach. So I got myself a job with the Institut de Technologie de Montréal as a teacher in architecture. And I'd learn as many words as I needed for the next day's lectures, and it was fine because we got along well with the students. And I would learn things like, on peut parler aujourd'hui des panneaux de gypse préfabriqués, and I'd show them what it was. He says, oh, c'est le gyprock. Oh, le gyprock, sure. And this is the way we got through. After a year, so I was getting along fine. I got my brevet d'instruction. I have a French teaching certificate. And I taught there for, 3 or 4 years. And then the whole institute became the first cégep de Vieux-Montréal. That was the first cégep. And so I taught there, and they wanted me to stay on because I was the only architect that they had. And I didn't want to become a pedagogue. I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't want to be an administrator, God forbid, in any of these institutions. So then they opened Dawson College, which was the first English cégep, so I switched over to Dawson. And I was teaching civil technology because they didn't have architectural technology, and I was always saying, come on, architectural technology is very important. Architects are not strong on technology. We should be training people to do it for them. So finally, they said, well, we cannot offer the course because there's no students, and we don't have students because we don't have a course to offer. That made sense to them. And eventually we had enough people who were turned down from other courses who took architecture, and we opened up the architectural school at Vanier College. That was a brand new building that was built for them, Vanier, right near Queen Mary. And I taught there for, I think I left in 85, so it was close to 20 years. And that was wonderful. I loved that. I loved the students. We had a great time. These were technological students. They weren't going to become, most of them didn't have the intention of becoming professionals. And this was a 3-year program, and we could place all these people. They became administrators, estimators, job supervisors, but they were prohibited from going to many other universities because they didn't have the requisite calculus and things like that. So McGill, for example, would not take a graduate from the technological school to go into architecture. And I went down to McGill. I said, why don't you take these people? They know so much about construction. Oh, they don't need that. I said, your architects don't have this information. They never learned business. They never learned estimating. They never learned building codes. They said they're going to learn on the job. I said, who's going to pay for that? And well, it's either going to be the client or the architect who's going to end up paying for it. They said no. Some of ours as graduates did go into U of M, and as a matter of fact, I'm still working for them. And I used to hire the best students for our office, as a matter of fact. And some of them one of them is still working there, and this is going back a long, long time.
David, if you, obviously while you're teaching and you're, for lack of a better term, architecting, you had to be running a business at the same time.
Oh yeah, we ran the business at the same time.
And I'm sure there are some ups and downs and issues while you're trying to balance your time and continue to promote and bring in new jobs.
Architecture is very upsy-downsy. It's a wonderful profession. It's a terrible business because there's very little continuity in architecture. You do a job for somebody, and the job is finished. You've got to find somebody else to do it. There's not too many that have a continuum. This is why I prefer to work with engineers, because engineers had a greater record of continuity, and especially companies like SNC, Shawinigan, and bigger people that we worked for. And all this industrial work was going on. Smelters were being built, concentrators were being built, metal forming plants of every sort, chemical plants. There's a huge industrial background, refineries and so on.
When we're going to have to break in a second, but when we come back, I'd like to maybe touch a little bit on, for anybody that's looking to go out and start their own business or run their own business, the type of promoting or the type of hobnobbing that you have to do in order to try and get some of the jobs that you've gotten over the years.
Hmm.
Today's Entrepreneur with guest host Michael Newton, and our guest David Reich returns in a moment, 7:23 on CJAD.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur. Dan Delmar, along with guest co-host Michael Newton of Fuller Landau, sitting in for Josh Miller. And our guest this evening is David Reich, and we're talking about Mr. Reich's career in architecture. And I have to ask, it seems like Quebec, there's been different phases of architecture. There was a lot of heavy concrete, perhaps in the 60s. Now it seems like more buildings are going up in glass. You've seen a lot of the evolution. Do you think is there one era in architecture that you like the best, and do you like where architecture is going?
Do I like where it's going now? No, because it's computer driven, And anything that you can design on a computer, they ask you to build, which costs a lot more money. And I'm not going to discuss aesthetics because this is a very subjective matter. Some people, everybody knows about beauty, especially people who hand out building permits. They tell you it doesn't suit, it's not sensitive enough, doesn't fit this environment, blah, blah, blah. It makes no difference. Somebody there is saying, I don't like it. So we have to stay away from that. It's no use. What one person likes, another person doesn't. But in terms of the effect of technology on the aesthetics of architecture, certainly, all the time happened. I can give you just little examples. We could walk through Montreal, in fact, any city, and you could tell just by looking at the shape of the building when they were built. For example, in Montreal, before the war, most windows were made of wood, and these were double-hung windows that slid up and down. So consequently, the proportion was more high and narrow. Then, after the war, aluminum became a material, and aluminum windows could slide horizontally. So the proportion changed to horizontal. They were long and less high. All these things had impacts on the aesthetic. For instance, when we started the housing in the housing field back in the early 50s, and we would go, and Côte St. Luc was all farmland, and most of St. Laurent was farmland. So we went out, and the only thing we had to worry about when we went to visit the site was whether they locked up the bull or not. But what happened, we found out very quickly, for example, that they didn't have sewers, didn't have storm sewers. Now, storm sewers take away the drainage water from roofs and driveways and so on. So they said, well, you cannot slope your driveway down to a garage. Consequently, you can't put the garage in the basement. So what are we going to do? Put the garage above ground. We put the garage above ground. That means you can have it. All the rooms are going to be in the second story. I said, well, we can't have that. What we'll do is we're going to drop the living room and the kitchen halfway down, and we'll call it a split level. Oh, split level. So this became a fashion. Why? Because they didn't have sewers.
Wow.
Now, then everybody said, well, you got a split level, I got to have a split level. So it made no difference. So this is talk about aesthetic. This is the way things was. Town of Hampstead, they had a rule at the time that every roof had to be at an angle of 30 degrees. Why? No reason for it. So all of these things were legislated either from some esoteric reason, which nobody could quite think, and this became accepted as an aesthetic, because aesthetics is a very subjective thing. And when people would design houses, a person would come and say, I want a house. They say, fine, what do you want it to look like? They say, I'd say, well, what have we got here? You could show them a catalog. So this is the Queen Anne period. You like the Queen Anne period? No, I don't like the Queen Anne period. Well, what about the Victorian period? No, I don't like the. What about the Tudor period? No, I don't like that period. What period would you like? I say, well, I'd like when my guests would come, they would drop dead. Period. That was.
Our guest is architect David Reich, and we'll continue on in a moment on today's Entrepreneur at 7:30 on CJ80.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:34 on CJAD. Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur. Inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar, along with Michael Newton of Fuller Landau, who's filling in for Josh Miller this week. And our guest this evening is architect David Reich.
Thanks, Dan. I think we're going to a little bit later on get into some of David's writing work that he's done. He's written a published book, and many of you may have seen he has a regular contributor to the op-ed pages of the Gazette. But I'd like to maybe take a little bit of a business angle, David. And obviously, being an architect, there's a significant amount of risk involved, insurance, and a number of things that may come back to haunt you, I guess, somewhere down the road. How do you deal with those? How do you prevent those? And how do you try to mitigate some of the risks associated with it?
Well, mitigate is the right word because you can't prevent them. You're responsible for everything you do. You're responsible for everything your employees do that you're paying. You're responsible for the engineers that you hire. You're responsible for the materials that come on the job because the architect knew or should have known, as the lawyers say. Consequently, we're exposed to tremendous risk. And there's no prescription for a period for it. They can sue you 5 years later. They can come back 20 years later and sue you, and they do.
And in some cases, they can even come back and sue the estate.
They can sue the estate as well, exactly. So the protection is very little. And actually, you carry insurance, but no insurance is enough. You just can't carry it a sufficient amount.
I was dealing with an estate a number of years ago where that situation arose, where after the individual had passed away, the estate was being liquidated. The beneficiaries obviously accepted the estate, but while they were accepting the estate, they also had to accept the risk that was associated with it and had to maintain an ongoing insurance policy, despite the fact that their father had passed away a number of years before, in order to protect themselves. And obviously, this is something that I guess, to a certain degree, I guess that risk is like it is in any profession. It's an attempt to try and self-police and avoid any kind of negligence.
Yes, but other provinces, for instance, have a prescription period. They say after so many years you can't sue the architect or whatever the story is. But in Quebec, you have no protection.
So if you were starting an architectural firm today and you wanted to try and hit the pavement, and like you were used to tell your father, I'm just going to sit back and wait for everybody to show up. The reality is nobody's going to show up. You have to get out there. You have to pound the pavement. Where do you begin?
Well, that's very interesting. You begin with what you know and who you know. And then you network. And we found networking is the best thing. Advertising really doesn't work. I had the occasion, I used to quiz clients afterwards, why did you choose me? And there was one common thread. They said, because we felt we could trust you. I don't mean financially, but that we had the confidence that you could do the job. So you've got to project that confidence. And
how do you instill that? How do you instill that level of confidence?
Well, first of all, you have to know what you're doing. You have to be technologically up there, you have to be financially up there, and you have to know what the problems are of the person who's hiring you. And this is the way he has to identify with you and you identify with him.
When you get into the construction side of it, obviously there's construction bonds that are put in place. Is there such a thing from the architectural side?
From what point of view?
Or basically, you're putting up some cash or some kind of bond to secure the building, to secure the job that you're working on.
No, we don't. The jobs are secured by bonds, which are put out by bonding companies. There are essentially three kinds of bonds. There's the bid bond, that is, that the bidder will actually sign the contract and start the work. That's one bond. Then there's the performance bond, that he will do the work according to the contract, and if not, the bonding company will come in for the amount of the bond and complete it. And then there's the labor and materials payment bond, because as you realize, anybody who works on a job has the right to claim his money from the building. In other words, if a worker is not paid, he can put a lien on the building and have that building seized and sold in order to pay him.
So when you were putting your projects together and you were designing, who was ultimately paying you?
Who ultimately? Well, we always wanted to be paid by the owner of the building, because we had the same lien right as any other worker.
What was the payment format like? Was it deposit up front? Was it interim payments?
Deposit
Did you get paid at all?
Deposit up front. Yes, dream on. No, we were lucky to be paid. Period. No, we tried to cover our tracks because we were making an investment, and we would work depending. It might have been a percentage, it might have been an hourly rate, depending on the nature of the job. Some jobs we couldn't possibly know what the fee would be because of the nature of the job. So we would have to estimate it based on the number of drawings which we knew we would require. We knew pretty well what it would cost to prepare a plot plan, a roof plan, a section, elevation, details, and so on. So we could put together an estimate. Now, when we're doing major industrial jobs, and I'm talking about, well, the last job which I finished was the aluminum smelter up in Lac Saint-Jean, which was 1 kilometer long and half a kilometer wide and cost $3 billion. Now, if somebody would ask me, what's my fee? Well, there's no way I could tell them what the fee was. I could tell them an estimate, and I tell them our hourly rates. And they knew that we've done 4 or 5 smelters before, so they had confidence in us. And they would pay us, let's say, on a monthly basis, based on the hours that we put into it.
Okay. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about your writing. We'll do a complete shift here. I remember back in November or October, actually, I got an invite from you a couple of times that you were having your book published.
Yes.
You decided that obviously teaching and architecture was not a significant challenge in life, that you would now have to try. You would have to try and work to print.
No, it's true. The book was, I had it published, but that was my 10th book. But it wasn't the 10th book I had published because I self-published the other 9. This happened to catch the eye of a publishing company, and they wanted it in French. They took it, they translated it, and now it's been published in French. And then an English publisher saw it just about the same time, and he published it in English. So both books are out in those two versions. So that's, in effect, my story. The other books which I wrote, I self-published, and I used to take them around to stores. Double Hook sold several hundred of them, but Double Hook, unfortunately, went out of business. And I started writing. Believe me, it's not a money-making proposition, but I love to write. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do.
What did you write about?
Well, I started writing, well, I've always written, always since I know. And when I was going to school and so on, I used to write spoofs, entertainments I used to write skits. And I would tell the kids stories as my kids grew up. So the kid wouldn't eat. I'd tell him a story. He opened his mouth. I'd shove a spoon into it. And when we ran out of food, that was the end of the story.
Is that because he was snoring and his mouth was wide open?
No. He was entranced.
Okay.
Couldn't stay. Couldn't go to sleep on that. Had to know what was going to happen next. So did I. Want to know what was going to happen next.
When you were writing, did you go to school? Did you take some courses?
I took courses all the time. I took courses at Concordia. I spent years in Thomas More Institute until they finally refused to give me any courses. They wanted somebody else in the class. And I go to, even now, to Humber College for summer seminars. And I belong to different writing groups. Yeah, writing is a wonderful thing because nobody tells you what to write. In architecture, they tell you what to do. See, the client tells you what to do. Everybody tells you what to do. But in writing, you're free.
So basically, there's no building codes. There's nobody standing over your shoulder.
Right.
It's pretty much what you want, when you want, how you want it.
Exactly. You can write anything.
And not 9 books that were self-published. Does that mean basically photocopied and schlepped around town on your own, I guess? Is that it?
They were printed by my printer, yes. They were schlepped around town. Actually, that's good exercise.
Was architecture your job and writing your passion, or did you have two passions?
Well, writing didn't take over the passion to the extent that it did after I retired, because after I retired, I had so many other things to do. I also I do portrait drawing, for instance, and things like that. But those are hobby things because I enjoy doing it. No, the writing took over because I enjoy doing it so much. There's nothing more thrilling than sitting down and doing a story which satisfies you and satisfies other people. Architecture was equally satisfying, but it's just so much more controlled. You see, you have too many other people to please which you could not possibly please. So you're always making compromises, and making compromises is not fun. But writing is fun. You didn't have to compromise. You could write anything.
And clearly that wasn't sufficient for you, because now at 83 years old, you've decided to design and manufacture a new product.
Yeah, I know, but that was also fun. I walk very badly, not because I choose to, but I do my best. And I have railings all around the house to keep me from falling down. See, it would be fine if I were a ballet dancer, but clearly I'm not. And these railings were fairly expensive. They were stainless steel, welded together, and so on. I said, no, this is really a waste. I can do far better railing than that, much less expensively. And I did, and I designed this railing, which has brackets that can be fitted instantly any place along its length. Consequently, you can take a piece of aluminum extrusion, cut it to any size, any length you want, snap in the brackets any place you want, and screw them in the appropriate place. If it's not the right place, you unsnap it and you resnap it.
Can this be done by an individual? Does it have to be professionally installed?
Well, it's a good idea to have it professionally installed if you don't know how to install it. But it's like putting up a picture frame. It's you just have to really find a solid place in the wall. You want to find a stud. Now, a contractor has a stud locator, and if you can locate the stud, so much the better. But if you're just going to screw them into the gypsum board, then
clearly the warranty doesn't kick in at that point.
No, we don't warrant it because we do not do the installation. We just provide the material. Okay. It's like somebody providing a towel bar.
Our guest this evening on Today's Entrepreneur is architect and author David Reich. Quick break and more of Mr. Reich's thoughts and memories in a second. It's 7:45 on CJAD.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:48 on CJAD. Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur. Michael Newton with me as a co-host, filling in for Josh Miller. And also we'll bring into the conversation, along with architect and author David Reich, is Stephanie Darwish, who is the marketing and communications director for Fuller Landau.
Yeah, it's nice to have Stephanie here with us. Stephanie, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So basically, I think we're, David, you discussed about the new product. First of all, give us the name of the new product.
New product is called Promenade because it's an aid to promenading, and of course in French and English it's good, promenade. It's we have, I think, a nice selling point. Where there's a wall, there's a way.
Very
That's
nice.
one thing. And we had another one, give your legs a hand. So this, it's going to be so popular, it's just going to sell right off the shelves.
Perfect. I mean, this is still in the infancy stage, and clearly when you're trying to get a new product off the ground, there's probably a list of about 100 ways to do it. Some of them involve some significant capital, some of them being a little bit on the cheaper side. One of the things maybe, Stephanie, you can discuss is, I guess, the use of some of the social media in order to try and get a product out there and get some exposure as part of your marketing plan.
Well, I think especially for a product like this, like you gave me a great demonstration earlier today, that demonstrating how easy it is to work is the way to go for it. So for me, to tell you, I would do a YouTube video on it, and actually, funny enough, YouTube is probably the third most popular site among people over the age of 65. So it is a place where they're looking, and it is a place for you to very easily demonstrate your product to them.
Well, we'd like to learn more about that, believe me. We have, of course, a site, with an address and so on, which shows our product. So people can tune into that, but certainly if we can improve it, we'd be glad to. Because, as you saw, it's a very simple thing.
Exactly, and you can embed your videos right onto your site.
Mm-hmm.
You can buy AdWords for your site. You can, with such a great and easy product that people are actually able to physically see how it's used.
Yeah.
Your options for the online world are basically limitless, I think.
That's right. It's we really could see this as being the Model T of railings, because you cannot make a railing less expensive than this. Other people could probably copy it, but and it's patented, by the way. But you cannot make it less expensive. It's an aluminum extrusion. Aluminum is a Quebec product. Extruding is a very low labor process. So we looked into doing it in China, needless to say, but it just wouldn't pay. Even if it's a few pennies cheaper, it has to be shipped here. The quality control becomes much more difficult, and so on. So it's a Canadian product and made of Canadian materials with Canadian labor.
A lot of inventors will create their product and then try and sell it themselves. And I've heard a number of people contend that the inventor should never really try and sell his product. He should try and work with somebody. Have you started discussions with anybody from a distribution perspective? From
yes,
manufacturing?
We have, but there's there's several ways of going about this. If we're talking about distribution, then you talk about the big distributors, like the Rona, Canadian Tire, even IKEA, and so on. It's very difficult to get in with these people, and there's no reason why we should not be able to. But there's a lot of parameters, and I don't have the experience really in dealing with these things. They're going to, needless to say, they'll pay a rock bottom price. For instance, if you go into Walmart, which would be a wonderful place to sell these things, but then we have to be able to fix the price at a point where they get sufficient discount to make it interesting for them, and that we still come out with a profit.
Have you determined the retail price for the product yet? And
how? Oh, we know exactly what it costs us to produce.
Okay.
If we're going to say we can produce it for X dollars, if we're going to sell it through another company, we have to sell X less 50% or X less 80%, and we don't know. Because one of the parameters is going to be the volume that we're going to make, because the more we make, the cheaper it becomes, and so on. And also, do we give exclusives or do we not? We're looking into all this now.
Is this going to be manufactured here in Quebec?
It's manufactured right now in Quebec, yes.
Okay, and at this point, that'll be the continued mode, I guess?
There's no reason why not, because we can produce miles of this thing relatively inexpensively in Quebec. Okay,
and I guess just maybe for those that clearly cannot see the product, even though David brought it with him, he didn't get the memo that we're actually on radio and not on TV. What is the standard length of the railings?
Well, you mean what we're producing?
Yeah.
The only limitation we have in the length of the railing is the shipping of it. We could make a rail 50 feet long if we wanted to, but you just can't send it anywhere. I think we're producing them right now in 12-foot lengths, but these can be cut very easily on a chop saw. It's with an aluminum cutting blade. So we can cut it very quickly to the fraction of an inch.
Coming up, remaining moments with our guest, David Reich, and we'll ask Mr. Reich what advice he would have for entrepreneurs. CJD time is coming up to 7:53.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Remaining moments with our guest, David Reich, author, architect, also in studio, Stephanie Darwish, Marketing Communications Director for Fuller Landau, and Michael Newton is here filling in for Josh Miller this week.
Thanks, Dan. I would be remiss if I didn't give David the opportunity to plug his book, the one that was published, not the self-published ones.
Yes, the book is called You Could Lose an Eye, My First 80 Years in Montreal.
Excellent. Very nice.
There'll be a sequel, My Next 80 Years in Montreal.
I don't know if I'm still going to be around to read it, but I look forward to it.
I don't know if I'll be around to write it.
Any words of wisdom for an entrepreneur? Is there something that you, after your 80 years of seeing things, that you would say?
I tell you, I've been very, very lucky because, first of all, I chose a profession that I enjoyed very much. And if I want to tell anybody anything, I say, love what you do. If you're doing what you don't like to do, then you're leading a miserable life. You're just looking forward to getting retired, or you're looking forward to the weekend, or you're looking forward to some distant people. Love what you do when you're doing it. This is what gives you the kick.
Excellent. Stephanie, if you got a few words for us?
I do have a few words for you. When it comes to online marketing, be honest, because the Google knows what you do, and they'll look out at you.
Very good. I'd like to thank David. Obviously, there's no possible way that we could have taken the 20 pages of notes that you brought with you into an hour's worth of radio. But needless to say, for those of you that have ever met David, he's a very colorful, very entertaining, and fascinating individual. I've had the pleasure of knowing him for 20 years, and hopefully for another 20 years, as he continues to roll out products. And it never ceases to amaze me how he seems to be as passionate and as interested today as he was the first time I met him. And I have to say, David, that clearly is an indication of the man and the passion for what you're doing. And I think that kind of sums up the words. I've co-hosted, I guess, a couple of times in place of Josh, and I always kind of finish, I guess, with the same story. But it's amazing to see how everybody throws the same thought out there, and that really is, do something that you're passionate about. It shouldn't be Monday, it shouldn't be a Thursday, it shouldn't be a Sunday. You should be going to do what you want to do because you want to do it. And that's pretty much what I can throw out there, is make sure you're passionate about what you're doing. It makes the day a heck of a lot quicker. Dan?
Michael Newton, thank you so much. Stephanie Darwish, thank you very much. And David Reich, it's been a pleasure hearing your stories, and we'll have to have you back on Today's Entrepreneur at some point. Best of luck with the promenade and whatever new innovations you come up with next. CJD time is coming up to 8 o'clock. News is next. Then it is Delmar at night with guest host Joey Elias. Good night.